type of reference question has to do with genealogy. For those interested in researching their family history, census reports can be valuable information. With that in mind, we're going to evaluate the United States Census Bureau at census.gov. As a positive of this source, I like the clean and easy look of this page. Tabs across the top make it easy to find information, and the information looks at first glance to be easy to understand and easy to find. Let's keep in mind our 5 questions for evaluating government sources. 1. Is the government or agency responsible for the data considered reliable? 2. What political agendas or biases may be present due to the government branch or agency responsible for the data? 3. Who actually collected the data and how? 4. Is this a primary or secondary source? 5. Why was this written and for whom? Let's start with the first one. Is the government branch or agency responsible for the data considered reliable? If we go to the About the Bureau tab, there's a ton of handy information here that's very transparent. First of all, who we are explains their mission and who they are affiliated with. They fall under the Department of Commerce, which the general public has little knowledge of, meaning that there are no widely known reasons to distrust this particular branch of the government. If we click on what we do, this explains what data they collect and when, and it also explains how the government uses it. If we scroll to the bottom, and clicking on any of these specific types of data that they collect gives you more information about it, including how they do it, what they do it for, and how often. If we scroll back up here and click on, if we go back, and we click on Policies and Notices, users can find information about how the Census Bureau tries to protect the general public's privacy and what sort of data they can collect and how that is personally identifiable. Also, there's a link here to the Freedom of Information Act and open government. Continuing on, there is information about how they do their citations to make it easy to understand how they are referencing materials and how you can find it. I also appreciate the fact that they've included this information here about plain writing. If you click on that, it explains that the Census Bureau is required to present their information in a way that the general public can understand. This is a law. If we continue on with this question about government reliability, under our About the Bureau tab, under History, if we scroll down, we can see information about the pictures, including the fact that our pictures for this came from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So in general, from this information, we can verify that the government branch or agency responsible, i.e. the Census Bureau, is considered reliable. Our next question is, what political agendas or biases may be present due to the government branch or agency responsible for the data? If we go back to our About the Bureau tab and who we are, we can click on our leadership to find out more about the current director. We find out that he was nominated by President Obama and that he was confirmed by the Senate in a unanimous vote. The fact that it was unanimous may mean that he is not considered biased by either party. We can also find out about bias by clicking on About the Bureau, History, and then if we click on Genealogy, Decennial Census Records, then we can click on Censuses of American Indians. Through this, we learn that in past censuses, they did not include many Native Americans, nor did they actually identify them. Additionally, wording of questions and types of questions included from past censuses show prevailing attitudes or terminology of the time. For example, if we go to our Through the Decades tab, Index of Questions, we can see our previous census questions. In some of them, Native Americans are listed as copper, or in some others, they are listed as IN, short for Indian. Another example may be detailed occupational categories, which may offer more options for men than women, and whites versus Native Americans, or African Americans. Because the Bureau of Census is not responsible for what happens to the data, only for collecting it, the chances for bias in presentation are less. However, the Bureau is currently facing a lawsuit for bias in hiring the last set of census takers for the 2010 census. The lawsuit, filed in 2010 and certified as a class action in 2014, alleges that since the Bureau placed limitations on hiring census takers with different forms of criminal records, they were discriminating against hiring racial minorities such as African Americans or Hispanics. I found this information just by doing a simple Google search for United States Census Bureau bias. In general, from this that we can understand that questions may have inherent biases in them, but the presentation of the information itself is not generally inherently biased. This leads us to our next question: who actually collected the data and how? Under our History tab, which we're still under, we can go to the Innovations tab, Data Collection, and explains how data is collected along with handy definitions for unfamiliar terms like statistical sampling, and there are links for further information. Under that same History tab, Through the Decades, Questionnaires. As I said earlier, viewers can see the actual census documents with questions going back to 1790. If we click on Through the Decades, Census Instructions, we can also learn about how the history of the census has been conducted, starting with U.S. Marshals, going to temporary door-to-door census takers, and finally with a combination of traveling census takers and relying mostly on mailed questionnaires. This tab also lists the instructions for following up on non-responses. So our question about who actually collected the data and how is very thoroughly answered under this tab. Which leads us to our next question: is this a primary or secondary source? Because the site includes both primary sources in the form of the original documents, the original census questions, as well as secondary sources in the form of the site's explanations of those documents, the answer is both. Our next question is, why was this written and for whom? While the information is collected for the government to use for voting, redistricting, apportionment, congressional affairs, and general needs, the website was designed to inform the public. So a pro of this site is that it seems to be very user-friendly and transparent. It's easy to understand. The genealogy tab provides tips. If we go to the genealogy tab under other resources, there are tips, there are other resources, there's lots of information about where to look, how to guide your search. We also have current statistics. If we go back to our landing page, we can see things like this fact here that nearly 1 in 10 in the U.S. want to move, general current statistics. Additionally, under our newsroom, we can see news releases, and if we go back to our About the Bureau page, we also have history. We can also see that under reference there are lesson plans, there are publications, there's a frequently asked questions section. This all makes the site very user-friendly. However, as cons, the census records themselves are not actually available online. Only the questions. The actual records are not maintained by the Census Bureau, but are maintained by the National Archives and Records Administration. This means that the site provides information about the census for those interested in genealogy and some resources, but it does not actually provide genealogy records. Also, sometimes these tabs can be hard to figure out. As you can see right now, I'm under the History tab, but if I go back to my main page, I don't see the history tab and what's under it. There's a lot of information on here, and the way that the tabs are laid out can make it hard. Like you can see, the information under the history tab is not showing up. So it can make it hard to go back and find information that you found on a previous tab unless you keep very detailed records of how you got there on the site. In general, though, this is a very user-friendly site with a lot of information that can be very helpful to people looking for either past information or current information.